Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge, and welcome to Eldridge and Company. John Houston started in politics by running political campaigns on Michigan farmland and in auto factories. But he's equally comfortable and successful on the streets of New York. His ideas for bold television and literature were used by the Clinton-Gore creative team, and here in New York, he's unique in his ability to properly herald women candidates, of which I happen to be one. We're going to do a series now of political discussions leading up to the conventions and the election, and one of the major things is the question of political consultants, which you are one. What is a political consultant?
A political consultant helps a candidate get their message out. You try and find the essence that is unique to that particular candidate and come up with a strategy and an execution that properly works and ends up with a 50% plus one result on election day.
That's the best of political. I mean, the impression we get, and that's not from political consultants because I think they kind of specialize in delivering a positive message. At least some of the messages I get is that the political consultants decide what the candidate's going to say. How often does that happen?
It happens a fair amount. It depends on the candidate. It depends on how strong the candidate is. It's like any other business. You get to decide if you're going into a tailor or a hairdresser what you're going to end up looking like. So it really flows from the candidate.
So we have these presidential elections now. We have two slates, right? The Bush-Cheney and Kerry Edwards.
You're not counting Nader?
I'm not, but I should be. Does he have a political consultant?
No, he's his own political consultant, I
One
think.
gets that idea, I think. And then you've got the other guy who's running on the Green Party line. And I think there are other candidates too, but the two major candidates. When did they start looking around to decide to hire a political consultant? Is that the first person you hire, or when do you hire them?
Again, it's a subjective judgment call, but this presidential campaign for Democrats started the day after the Supreme Court decision that named Bush. So they've been, and in many ways, people like Kerry and Edwards have been planning for this their entire lives. So in terms of decision making, the first decisions you start making are how do you go about raising money, because the political consultant is really in charge of spending the money.
Right.
And in order to do that, you have to...
And they get paid a lot.
Yeah.
Depending on what candidate. Let's talk presidential politics now.
Sure. They get paid a fair amount, but the question is, it's gone down in terms of a percentage of media buy. There was a time 20, 30 years ago where political consultants got 10 or 15% of the media buy. Now those days are gone, unfortunately.
And by a media buy, you mean when you buy the time on television stations around the country?
Exactly.
And do the political consultants usually buy it so they get a commission on the sales?
Well,
it depends what the team is.
It's a way of doing it, sort of a taximeter kind of a thing. There's got to be a way of remunerating the people who work for you, and that's how the consultants have done it.
Is a political consultant, I mean, I think what the problem is we have this name or this category, and it includes a lot of different things. Karl Rove, is he a political consultant?
Sure. But there's all kinds of politicians, too. So just by
Right.
that token, there are all kinds of consultants. Karl Rove came out of doing direct mail, so he really understands how to parcel out and slice and dice the voting blocks.
And direct mail is when you write a piece of literature and you mail it, and usually it's mailed to a specific audience, which we call a target audience?
Well, it's a subtler distinction, actually. Karl Rove was able to do direct mail fundraising, which allowed him to do mail year in and year out. There's a subset, or a different kind of mail, which is voter contact mail. Sometimes it's called persuasion mail. And that is only during campaign season. So in fact, Karl Rove was able to build a business year in and year out. So in Decembers, he could send out fundraising.
Did Karl Rove grow up with Bush? Do you know?
Not as far as I know, no. But he did grow up politically. He was, I think, involved with the college Republicans way back when. And he met Senior, George Bush Senior, George Herbert Walker, when Senior was the head of the GOP's Republican National Committee during the Nixon years.
So that was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And his specialty then was direct mail. But
Fundraising mail, particularly.
Fundraising. But nowadays he's given credit for much more.
Well, he expanded out from that. That business allowed him to run campaigns, which are profoundly cyclical. You know, for 3 months every other year, you get to you know, go out and be a warrior.
And does he handle people other than George W. Bush?
Not now. No, he's on the staff at the White House.
Oh,
as I
that's right.
understand
Oh,
it.
that's right.
I'm
Yes.
no expert, but
Right.
he ran a number of campaigns in Texas and was really one of the chief architects of Republicans taking over the state of Texas from the Democrats, who had been in charge since basically the days of Reconstruction.
So then you have a political consultant, or you've got somebody who is going to, well, so Karl Rove in a way is not a good example.
He's as good as any. There are a lot of different ways you get into this business. FDR's political guy, Jim Farley, you know, was ended up being head of the postal
Right,
service.
he was the postmaster
And so did
general.
Larry O'Brien for John Kennedy.
Right.
There are lots of ways one can be political, and basically, if you're in this business and you love it, and that's really what you can do if you're going to do
So
it. you have
what
to-
it really started out was being somebody that you got along with, if you're the candidate or the elected official, and whose advice you really counted on.
Sure,
and-
sure. So
and
a lot of
took.
them ended up being lawyers because lawyers were practiced at giving advice.
But now we've got a whole business. It's a whole industry. If you look on the internet, you've got a whole listing of political consultants. You've got associations. You've got all of that. It's interesting, and if you look at it, it's all different, right? I mean, there are political consultants that specialize, as you said, in direct
Sure.
mail. There are some that do television.
Well,
all
it's
different
become
kinds of things.
politics has become a large industry, and like everything
Yeah.
else in the culture, marketing is a huge component of any business. Coca-Cola is largely a marketing company, and we spend more selling, you know, doing ads for potato chips in our economy than we do.
So
on
do you think
politics.
that's a problem, that we're selling political candidates the way we sell potato chips?
Well, I don't think we are doing that. You know, I mean, you don't have Lay's out there, you know, damning other potato chip brands the way you have negative ads damning other candidates. So I don't think that's really it. And if you look at the production values of the commercials, it doesn't happen that way either. TV ads for politics are very low budget, whereas a TV ad for potato chips, you know, ends up being $250,000 or $500,000 or $1 million or more, depending on the shoot.
Do you, so the Democrats now have Bob Shrum. Kerry has Bob Shrum. Will Edwards have his own team? I mean, but they won't do separate commercials, for instance, will they?
No, not
Chances
likely.
are not.
But if there's a political situation that Edwards alone best solves, a political problem that Edwards can solve, then they'll do some kind of tactic. It may not be a TV commercial, but historically, vice presidential nominees have gone where presidential candidates can't tread. Edwards, for example, is from the South, and he'll be able to campaign in the South with a certain amount of credibility, where John Kerry needs to spend his time in equally significant battleground states.
So a political consultant is really a member of a team.
Absolutely.
And then there are teams of consultants.
Sure.
The Clinton-Gore creative team. What was that?
It was a handful of people, headed by Dick Morris and Bob Squire, God rest his soul, who put together a team of people to produce ads, actually in a trailblazing fashion. They were on the air in significant battleground areas in 1995, fully a year before the convention. And that was necessary because Newt Gingrich took over the House. So President Clinton was in a very weak position and needed to climb out of that.
It's so interesting, you know, I mean, because I'm so old. I started in politics when I was very young. My parents were always involved, so I was a poll watcher or something when I was 15 years old. I remember my first election district when I became 21. In those days, you had to be 21 to vote. And we went and we rang the doorbells because we didn't have television and people weren't buying ads on television. We rang the doorbells, we had a piece of literature, we talked about the candidate. We played the same role television does now. And it was very simple. right?
Well, that's how I got started in politics too, and in fact, that's one of the reasons I really remember those days fondly. And in fact, this year you've got the Kerry people coming back around to that notion of field, basically knocking on doors actually matters. You've got an interesting dynamic right now in the culture where there are hundreds of television channels when you add in cable, and as a result. And I think pretty much Bob Schrum and Karl Rove would agree with me, TV doesn't have the power that it used to. It's really only been the last 20 years, starting, say, with the Reagan era, that TV really had the kind of clout. But you have a situation now where Dan Rather and Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings don't have the kind of market share. Broadcast stations themselves don't have the kind of market share. So you're getting back to that kind of door knocking, doorbell ringing, field kind of an operation, and that's a good thing because it gets people involved. Democracy is about getting people involved, and that's one of the downsides of doing all these TV ads. It's one of the things I've always tried to persuade candidates to do, is do things that weren't TV and weren't radio, which is why I don't charge a percentage. I work on a fee basis so that I can advise candidates what the best tactic is without lining my own
relying
pockets.
on the selling of television time. I remember also that I think primaries are much more difficult for television in a way than a general election with one-on-one, I mean one against one, because all the commercials begin to fade into each other, don't they? I mean, the effectiveness of television commercials loses in effectiveness.
That's an issue, but you have states where there are competitive primaries. In Pennsylvania, Arlen Specter was challenged from the right.
True.
And that was largely a TV race. I mean, somehow you have to do enough media in enough different forms of media to get voters to the polls. In primaries, that's a particularly difficult task. In New York, it's a slightly different kind of a thing because so many races are decided by the primary result. Being elected the Democratic nominee in many ways, don't tell Mayor Bloomberg, is tantamount to election. It
makes me very unhappy in New York in recent years because it's such a Democratic state that the presidential candidates ignore it. And so we don't have place for people who want to volunteer and do things because we don't do that kind of operation anymore. There's no money spent. I mean, if you raise money, you said the first person you hire in a campaign is a fundraiser. You raise the money. Then you decide how you're going to spend the money. A certain amount of money goes to your advertising, your direct mail, your this and that and everything else. And the field operations in New York are very shortchanged, right? Am I wrong? In a presidential election.
For presidential election, sure. So, although I think early on, if you have one to talk about sort of a fantasy land, at one point when the Republicans were talking about, when they actually selected New York City as the convention site, I think there was a fantasy that maybe they could with George Pataki and Mayor Bloomberg, I think maybe they were thinking they could put New York in play. That hasn't turned out to be true, but I think they had the notion that they could possibly do that. And in fact, some polling in New Jersey suggests that New Jersey is a lot more competitive than it has been historically through the Clinton elections and the Gore election.
So I notice on the internet they're looking for volunteers from New York to go to other states because that's what we're doing. Sure. And that harkens back to '68 when McCarthy campaigned that way and sending people all over
sending
to
people
do
to
those
New Hampshire or
things.
Iowa, or in fact the civil rights movement when people from New York went on the buses down to the South.
Right. So what is it in politics that you like the most? What is it that grabs your attention and why are you in this?
I like winning.
No, come on.
Look, we have a unique nation, and the ability to involve people in making decisions, self-determination is just is a remarkable thing, and I believe that's still possible, even with all the money, even with all the back and forth on cable channels.
Did you grow up in a political family?
Actually, I did, the same way you did. My mother was a press secretary for a Democratic gubernatorial candidate, actually one of the few Democrats who lost in the 1964 Johnson landslide. His name was Neil Stabler, and he lost to George Romney, who was...
He was the head of the Democratic Party in Michigan.
Neil Stabler, yes.
Yeah, I remember him very well. I don't know why, but I do.
Well, and my mom advanced Bobby Kennedy trips in Michigan and was responsible for press operations.
And did she take you around?
My sister and I were the campaign kids for the Stabler campaign. So we would sit around. The smell of bumper stickers freshly printed on vinyl is a very familiar smell to me.
My baby carriages, because we always lived in Manhattan, always had stickers on them. I made steins for strollers and baby carriages, and I still want people to do that, but they don't seem to do that anymore because there's no money. Now you have to buy your own. Is that right? That's an influence of campaign finance legislation.
Actually, it is partly. It's also
Yeah.
partly about the campaign finance spending legislation. I mean, the notion that you have a limited amount of money to spend, and so
See.
the folderol has tended to fall away. But if you look at the Kerry website now, or back during the primaries, the Dean or Edwards websites, you could get a bumper sticker sent to you. It's not a problem.
But you had to buy it.
Nope.
Oh no, you got it free.
Nope.
Oh, that's
Nope.
interesting.
But again, this is another aspect of the return to field.
Right.
That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge in trying to deliver a message? I want to say selling a candidate, but that distorts it. And that was Joe McGinnis, wasn't it? That his first book, Selling,
Sure.
Selling,
The Selling of the Candidate, Selling of the President.
or something. Yeah.
No, 68.
68?
68.
Okay.
But it's a canard. I mean, the notion that you're actually selling it like packaged goods, maybe you turn this around and say that you can sell packaged goods like you sell a candidate. I mean, the notion is understanding what people care about, and the person who can better convince voters that they care about what they care about, that the more powerful the message is.
So we've left out polling, which seems to me to be a challenge to the concept of leadership. If, in fact, you constantly poll, and then how often is that polling result reflected in what the message becomes? I mean, are you reflecting what voters are thinking, or are you trying to lead voters?
Again, it depends on the candidate, and it's really up to the candidate how much they tailor their positions to polling. But if you look back, you have FDR is a good example, Jim Farley is a good example. There are political skills that are constant over the decades, over the centuries in America, which involve listening to what the concerns of voters are. And the task for a candidate is accurately sussing out whether we care more about Britney Spears or I don't know, fill in the blank, Iraq.
Did you see Fahrenheit 9/11?
Actually, I haven't yet.
Oh, God, because they haven't seen of Britney Spears, and you want to just shake her. She's chewing gum, and she loves Bush. So what can I tell you? I think Bush deceived voters in his first election, aside from the fact that he didn't win the popular vote. But I think he gave the impression of being more of a moderate than he turned out to be. That was a deliberate thing. So in a way, there was a great distance between reality and what the message was that they delivered.
Well, he was prospective. He wasn't president at that point, so he was pledging to be a compassionate conservative. Right. And he would argue, Karl Rove would argue that events overtook them. And in fact, he promised a tax cut, and he delivered a tax cut. He promised No Child Left Behind, and he delivered No Child Left Behind. He delivered the legislation. He delivered the legislation.
Right.
But
they haven't.
Whether it's played out, as
right.
promised, is a whole other, whole other ball of wax.
Now, do you think? So you're not going to say that voters are really manipulated by.
Well, some voters
political
are.
campaigns.
Some voters are. Some voters are easily manipulated. Some people will buy, the New York Post based on what it says on the headline. Never mind that it's a 4-paragraph story on the inside.
And the headline it said Gebhardt is Kerry's choice, so that will be a famous Post editorial, like with Dewey wins. But the news media, it seems to me, has also gotten into the business of. I can't figure out what they're doing. I mean, they interpret. Sometimes they sound so stupid. They interpret so many things. And, of course, now they're analyzing and interpreting commercials, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when does it end? I mean, it's all up to a voter who has to... how does a voter ever know what the truth really is? How do you can't.
I think voters are smart. I think voters can tell when they're being shined on and when they're not. The classic problem in mass media and in political campaigns, and to a certain extent in any other kind of marketing, is you have a certain segment of people who are your loyalists, and then you have a certain segment of people who are their loyalists, and the battle gets played out at the border between those two, between the loyalists, the marginals, if you will. And in an election like this, if you really don't know, at the presidential level, if you don't know whose side you're on at this point, maybe you're not that smart. maybe you are easily confused, and maybe that's why cable or broadcast or the TV commercials tend to be kind of moronic.
The cable, though, I meant to say this before when you talked about it, the cable has really made television more affordable to more candidates.
It has and it hasn't. You have to buy an awful lot of channels now, and each one of those channels cost a certain amount of money.
Right. But if you're a local candidate, you can really advertise on television where you couldn't have before.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's the brave new frontier in cable now is addressable ads, so that you could actually send a message only to certain zip codes or only to a certain region. Right now, if you were buying a cable ad in Manhattan on Time Warner, one of 2 or 3 systems in Manhattan, you're only getting south of, I think, 96th Street.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So do you advertise, do you ever think about advertising on the internet also?
Oh, sure. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. But the interesting thing about the internet is that they're kind of reinventing what it means
Right.
to do marketing. Because through Google Ads, what's going on is you enter in a search term on the Google and you get back the search results, but you're basically volunteering to the Google engine what you're interested in. So advertisers can buy the keyword John Kerry or the keyword Ronnie Eldridge and be able to deliver a message to somebody who's already interested.
So do you have a favorite in the different range of options to get a candidate's name across?
Well, it depends on the candidate, it depends on the district, it depends on the opponent, it depends on the political situation. I like to not do TV and radio ads, actually, because you only got 30 or 60 seconds to be able to get a message out. The nice thing about a piece of literature or something that non-traditional forms of media is that they can hold a piece of literature, a voter can hold a piece of lit in their hands for longer than 30 seconds.
Right.
It becomes, in a very primal way, kind of a talisman.
And there is the ability to really target in literature.
Sure. Well,
Because you can get all these lists and you can find all this information about the demography of the demographics of a district or a voter.
Voters are registered with the Board of Elections,
Yeah.
and they register with their birth date, and you can figure out what gender they are, and they give you the address and the zip code and the registration date. And then they also have at the Board of Elections the track record of what elections that particular voter has voted in. So that's actually a very robust set of information for somebody like me to go in and sort of put on a miner's cap and a pick and a shovel and mine the data.
Do you like doing smaller campaigns, local campaigns, than national campaigns, or you don't have a? They're all pose different challenges.
I like people who hire me.
Let's not be so crass.
Well, I don't take on candidates who I don't like.
Right.
This business is too hard not to, really.
Yeah.
And the task is so complex, from working with the candidate to working with the candidate's staff to working to doing the data mining involved. I like doing congressional races. I like doing what's important. Right now, what I think is important is Democrats taking over the state Senate. The Republicans have controlled the state Senate in New York for since the Johnson landslide. In fact, since just after the Johnson landslide. And if the state Senate were Democratic, you'd have a huge amount of Democratic policy going through that would reflect the fact that New York is a state with 2 Democratic senators, and historically gives 55-60% to the Democratic nominee for president.
So the next thing also would be a Democratic Senate and then term limits for the state legislature. So we'd be able to clear it out a little bit. Now, I know that's a controversial thing, and we can open up a whole nother subject. You have a special affinity, it seems to me, to work with women candidates. Is there something you like about them?
Yes. My mom was involved in politics, and I think that women candidates are an important representative of democracy. I think there should be more women in public office.
Do you think they have a different perspective to public policy?
Some do and some don't. It's like any other kind of candidate. Some candidates are extremely liberal. Some candidates are extremely conservative. Some candidates are good. Some candidates are bad. So yes, to a certain extent, they have something unique to offer. But a hack is a hack, no matter what gender they are.
Do you think the national election is going to be won by who has the best media and campaign organization, or by the events in the world?
Well, those are three parts, in fact. The best media, the best campaign organization, and events in the world. So, yes, is the answer. All three of those things are going to be a determinative. Do we have another terrorist attack? God forbid. To the ads and operation that the Kerry Edwards team have put together, do they cohere? Do they resonate with marginal voters in marginal states? We don't know yet. So it's going to be a wild ride.
But don't you think, and we have 1 minute or less, don't you think underneath it all, it's a voter's intuitive response to the person they see running?
Sure, absolutely. But then at some level,
what you're saying is you have to find the way to connect with that.
Yeah, and sometimes you can blow it. You look at poor Howard Dean. You can sometimes confirm people's worst opinions of you as well as your best.
Yeah, but that was, we shouldn't get into Howard Dean now because we don't have any time, but that was, he didn't lose it because of the way he yelled at that, and the way it was broadcast at that rally. He had already lost before then. And he shouldn't have lost.
Well, what he did, though, is he ruined any chance for a comeback.
And but this race reflects his campaign, it seems to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. You know, I was a Dean delegate, ran as a Dean delegate, and I admired that spirit and loving this.
I did too.
Anyway, John Houston, thank you very much for giving us some broad pictures of what political consultants are and how important they are to a campaign. And we'll watch this campaign very carefully and see what happens.
Yes, we will.
All right. Thank you.